Walt, this week Alphabet reported, Tesla reported, the Mobileye CEO stepped down, and I'm listening to the Tesla earnings call. I said, oh my goodness, it's Walt! You asked the great question about Tesla Semi with FSD, so that entered the picture on that same call. We did get some color from Robotaxi. What were your takeaways from the Tesla call?
I mean, overall, the Bloomberg messaging that I was getting from investors during the call was that the call sounded downbeat. And right around the time I was getting those messages, I think Elon chimed in that he was actually feeling under the weather. So, that was an issue. Investors react to a lot of different things. Obviously, the CapEx was up. I'm not sure why that is a major surprise. But to me and to our listeners, the key thing, I think, was just getting some more indications of, what's going on in Austin and some of these other autonomous markets for them, and when we can expect scaling.
The nice thing on the call was we did get some color on the autonomous miles, 380,000 unsupervised miles. That was a nice number to get, but it pales in comparison compared to Waymo's numbers.
Yeah, it was also interesting. He talked about 0 notable incidents. And I should have got his exact quote, but talked about people that were in the market trying to initiate problems for the cars. And we know that all too well about some people that are trying to create problems down there. But, we kind of knew if you do the mileage on that, and they're saying they're doing it all day, the math works out in terms of that many miles. But the issue, Grayson, is, Cybercab being on the road. Last week, I was getting, hyped up. Maybe that means we're closed for all these different reasons. NHTSA kind of moving their way as well in terms of removing some of these pedal and steering wheel requirements. But on the call, they talked about the fact that, look, they're going to have to this is a new chassis, a new shape, right? And they have to put miles. And I think we've talked about that on this program. This is something, whether it's trucking or cars or whatever, that you need miles that are specific to a new form factor, just like Waymo is dealing with when they moved to Ojai and then ultimately to Hyundai. So this is just, a further potential timeline, buffer, delay, whatever you want to call it, until I think we see a number of cars. Unless I'm wrong and they drop a ton of Model Ys in the market, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No, well, it reemphasized what you and I have talked about, and we've gotten some interesting inbound on it. It is not as easy as some individuals think to take one autonomous driving stack, to port it to another vehicle, to another vehicle, to another vehicle. It's actually a complex process. And what we learned on that Tesla call, all suddenly at once, it's not necessarily true. It's taking a long time, and it's a long process to go from the Y to Cybercab. And that ramp, I believe, will be slower than most individuals are expecting.
So it's a noisy day in the market. Again, people are focused on different things in the quarter. That, to me, is one of the bigger things in terms of the timing of the Cybercab. Ultimately, you're going to start getting this question more and more. So how many miles do you need to get to? And I'm sure the company will be asked that question in the future. If we're gauging 380,000, like if I'm going to say best case scenario with the number of Cybercabs that we see them dumping in these individual markets, I'm going to say it's at least 250,000 miles that they're going to want to log on the new chassis. And if you kind of work out the math on that, depending on the number of cars that they're putting in the market with drivers, right, safety drivers behind a wheel, best case, maybe you're saying end of the year is when they get to what I call the Autonomy Markets benchmark of 100 cars in Austin, or maybe one of these Florida markets, whichever they decide to scale first.
I think that's a very, very valid assumption. And at that same time, hopefully, as they add the miles on, the ODDs expand. And the one thing that we're clearly seeing from our field reporting, and we're seeing the photos on X, that Cybercabs are showing up in larger and larger numbers in markets. And that's a clear validator to your thesis of having to get to at least 250,000 miles until they can activate it.
And aside from these quantitative numbers, there was also some qualitative commentary. I think it was from Elon, maybe it was another one of the management team, just saying safety first. And we want it to be safe before we unleash it. This is stuff that I've talked about over the past year, that the culture of safety at Tesla and SpaceX is a much higher bar than I think a lot of people had assumed.
It became very clear on the call to anybody who's paying attention. Tesla's not cutting corners when it comes to safety, and Elon had the line, if there was one incident, a bump, it would be international headlines, and he's right about that. The risk to the safety for Tesla is probably higher than any company out there right now, just because Elon is such a polarizing figure to so many individuals.
Now, the other indication that we might have had is that, when we were at the Gigafactory and we saw that the Cybercab line being brought up, and it was delivered on schedule in Q2, there was some discussion about how it would take maybe 9 months or a year to get up to full capacity. Now, if on the call they're saying the production of the Cybercab is pacing to the validation miles and not the other way around, right? Then again, that could be an indication that you're probably talking 6-9 months down the road until you're getting that full production of the Cybercabs, which is simultaneous with when you have those validation miles and ready to go. So we're probably going to see these gold Cybercabs being stacked up to a certain extent in a lot of the lots that you have identified through your field work.
That raises the question in the timeline. Are we realistically looking at January, February, perhaps, of Cybercab going into some sort of service?
Well, like I said, best case scenario, end of year. So best case scenario is not necessarily your highest probability scenario. That's just a different way of saying it.
There's a lot of ways to say things, and it's going to be super, super interesting. The one thing that I found fascinating, and this goes into your world with Telco Corner, the Starlink integration. What do you make of that? And I got to ask from a telco perspective, what do you truly think that's there for?
Well, I loved how they kind of drummed up what you said even prior to Autonomy Markets, what you used to pitch on Road to Autonomy, like getting in a car and watching the Super Bowl. And they were talking about the types of ubiquitous speed, excuse me, download speeds that were available to watch movies or whatever in the back of these cars, because obviously people's times are going to be freed up. The flip flop on that is what I was asking about, is on the SpaceX side of things. There's a lot of discussion about SpaceX becoming a competitor with AT&T and T-Mobile and others. They're going to need ways to offload that capacity. If you're basically using Starlink to backhaul from the car, back up to space, then that car itself becomes a hotspot for any mobile users that are around it. So I think I'd asked Elon about that on the call, and that kind of more of a telco corner question, but I figured since it was a Tesla product, I could probably sneak that in there. So we got that validation, which is what I suspected was the case.
I mean, you did a really great job asking your questions, and I was watching CNBC, and John Stankey, the CEO of AT&T, was asked that direct question. Will Starlink become a direct competitor to AT&T? Mr. Stankey was talking about their fiber, which I'm proud to report my fiber is working. And yes, there is Starlink backup now, but the fiber is working. So it seems to me that any which way you slice this, there's a lot of moving parts in the Tesla empire, and a lot of things for us to watch.
The other thing that that was interesting from the call, I don't know if this was a one-off, but there's kind of a new framing in terms of expansion, where there was some reference to scaling to the entire state as opposed to going city by city. But then, I think there was like maybe some, countervailing commentary. Do you think that's really the case, that they would just basically continue to broaden out in the state rather than just adding more cities like the Waymo model is?
It really just depends on the regulatory environment. If you look at the California regulatory environment, you have multiple paths. You can apply for a region, a city permit, or you can go for the state all at once. So perhaps that is a reference to California trying to get a statewide permit all at once. I do not know, purely speculating there. As it relates to encompassing the state, I think realistically it's just going to expand out of major metropolitan areas where people are, because there's a lot of states with very rural areas. Running a Robotaxi service economically wouldn't make sense unless there's bigger plans for FSD, which on the call, we learned that the growth of that's been pretty substantial.
We also chatted briefly with Lars on the call about, the federal unlock, obviously what Jonathan Morrison is doing at NHTSA, which he called them a very good partner. Obviously, Jersey and what's going on there is disheartening when they're talking about, mandating sensors, which obviously is kind of a crazy concept. But it didn't seem to me that they thought, other than what is going forward with NHTSA, that they needed anything more in terms of their scaling. They just have to deal with these states on a state-by-state basis. It didn't feel like there was a national framework beyond, again, removing these requirements for the brake pedal and the steering wheel.
The comments from Lars, the comments from Elon and Ashok, to me, signaled confidence that Tesla believes that they have a path forward to do this. So I think there's a lot of confidence there as they're getting ready to roll this out. And you said this in past episodes, and I believe you're 100% correct that Cybercab will ultimately be the ultimate scale vehicle for the Robotaxi service.
Now, this last one, which I really want to get a clappy hat for, because we do cover autonomy broadly here, including autonomous trucking. But I did slip in a question about asking about the roadmap for autonomy on the Semi. You know, they've been talking a lot more about Semi recently. Most people think, or not most, but a lot of people think that this could be very disruptive to ICE engine, type of deployment. So everyone's optimistic there. But remember, when this thing was first talked about, I think it was as early as like 2017. They were talking about whatever these long, I forget the word for it is, but a convoy, I guess, of semis and autonomy. It wasn't really talked about, so I had to throw that in the hopper. And of course, Elon gave a very aggressive timeline saying that he thought that they could get autonomy on the semi truck by the end of the year. He obviously played that down, saying like, look, the primary focus is what we're doing with Cybercab. But I mean, these guys can walk and chew at the same time. So I'm sure we'll see more words around autonomy with the Semi as the quarters unfold.
I'm going to give you two clappy hats. One clap, two claps. One clap for getting on the call and asking great questions. And two, thank you for the FSD Semi question, because if you talk to Matt McClellan at Covenant, he's been for test rides. He said his drivers at Covenant, the largest overnighter in the country, they love driving the Semi. David Moss, who's a friend of ours, he's actually ridden in Semi. He thought it was cool. First time he's ever been in there. And then on the backside of that, you're getting research out of Argonne National Laboratory, one of our national labs, around megawatt charging. So the pieces are coming together from an infrastructure standpoint to scale. And all suddenly you put FSD and Semi, that gets very compelling, very interesting when you combine it with a robotic charging arm, which a lot of professors and researchers believe that you need to truly scale megawatt semi-level charging. So great question, and a lot of questions are going to arise out of that.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of public, or a few public, and a lot of private companies that we've talked about in this podcast. I do think trucking is obviously a very large opportunity, probably is not as sexy as investors to look at right now, but there is Aurora, a $12 billion market cap company, public company, that's out there. Now, there's Kodiak, there's Plus that attempted to do a SPAC and didn't quite work out. And there's other companies, right? Wabi, which got some money from Uber, but still had a historical trucking business. There's a lot of companies. And look, I've experienced this on the telecom side, right? With SpaceX and launching their satellites. It's been a tremendous overhang. You referenced John Stankey from AT&T talking about CNBC and having to answer questions about satellites. The same thing is now going to happen to Aurora and Kodiak and everyone else about like, okay, what happens when, the Semi gets there and if it's right around the corner, and it doesn't have to be next quarter that it's occurring. And the challenge then is like, these companies, are not AT&T. AT&T generates free cash flow. Right. And is a sustained business. These other companies are still in this kind of startup phase where there's going to need capital. Now, potentially having this overhang, having to deal with talking about Tesla and a potential autonomous semi truck.
Yeah, and in the industry, you also have Bot Auto as private. You have Stack, which is a subsidiary of SoftBank. So you have a lot of moving parts there. But to me, let's remove the whose autonomy stack is better from this. Tesla with Semi eliminates one of the biggest risks that we've seen play out publicly in this market, the OEM risk. They're the OEM. They're vertically integrated. They're taking out that risk. That alone becomes very, very interesting, especially as they look to integrate, test, validate, and scale FSD and Semi, because that risk is gone.
I mean, this OEM problem crosses trucking as well as cars, in terms of the companies. I mean, again, to your point, Tesla kind of sees through that. That's why even though they don't necessarily have a 100-car market yet, that's why they're still in the mix, because once it works, they control their volumes. Waymo is still kind of eking out the volumes based on their existing partners. And I would guess it's a challenge for them to continue to add partners just because of the fear of Google. That's why I don't think we've seen potentially additional partners there. Trucking is even more challenging, I think, in that regard, for a variety of reasons. So, but look, the flip side of that, Grayson, though, is maybe if these trucking companies see that, Tesla Semi is heading their direction, maybe that forces them to rethink how they've been so, apprehensive about embracing technology. And when I say apprehensive, case in point, PACCAR, right? PACCAR, with their relationship with Aurora, forcing them, to put someone in that driver's seat. But I don't think PACCAR is alone. I think it's an industry which is going to be a challenge to deal with.
There's a lot of challenges, and it goes down to the supplier level, supply part A, supply part B. There's a lot of challenges in that ecosystem, and for individuals that want to go back in history and do the research and do the homework, it's been covered in depth in the LA Times. Look at the Mark Field's original Google self-driving car negotiations. The LA Times, Russ Mitchell did a good job covering it. Go read that, and that will give you a very clear insight into the correlations that's happening in trucking. There is a lot of, I'll use a term, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen that are extending their ability to override the master chef.
With that said, these companies are fighting the good fight. These are smart people. They're pushing what we think is good technology. Like we said, we hope for them, for all of them to succeed. It's unlikely that that's going to happen. But, just this week, Aurora, we've talked about this on this show before, where they're buying these international series trucks and putting their hardware on them, right? Because this is kind of like, how do you deal with PACCAR doing what they're doing and waiting for Volvo? So they're getting international. They've got a relationship with an upfitter that they can get hundreds of these trucks on the road and start to do their own version of scaling. Also, they showed a video with no one in the driver's seat. So unlike the PACCARs, where you can kind of see the guy eating the chips, now we can watch videos where there's no one in that driver's seat. So that's a very positive, I think, step for Aurora, potentially just overshadowed by a rough overall financial market this week, but also these statements by Tesla.
It's a positive, but me, I put on the inspector hat and read the fine print. And in the fine print on Aurora's public blog post, the following was stated: there may be a member of its roadside assistance team riding in the rear seat on some trips on board to gather feedback and provide support like roadside assistance. That was in an official blog. So I have the following questions, and I'm going to be that guy. Very polite, though. The questions that I think that should be answered. The first question is, does the backseat team member hold a CDL, and do they have access to an emergency stop button or kill switch while the truck is moving? The second question is, do they take over manual driving after a potential incident or drive the truck during any phase of the trip, yards, docks, or shoulder recoveries? Third question, if an onboard human has any active safety or monitoring duties during transit, it would be considered supervised. Do they? That's the question. And the final one, and this is a very important one for those that know the ecosystem, is the presence of this team member strictly optional, or is it required by insurance underwriters, truck OEM partners, or suppliers? Those are the questions that I'd like to see answered, but it's a positive step, but there's still some lingering questions.
I mean, I think you should detail all of those questions in your Sunday newsletter, which everyone should subscribe to if they don't already do that, because that was a lot to digest, 4 different questions. And I think they're valid ones as part of kind of the process of getting to commercial. Like the driving at the, driving the full way, that's not as relevant to me as long as that trip is occurring over whatever many miles, 100 miles, 200 miles, whatever. I mean, look at Kodiak, even in the Permian Basin, like they take that sand at 5 miles an hour. But at the end of the day, someone then gets in the truck and then parks it in order to accept the sand into the truck. They're going to move past that at some point, just like Aurora will move past parts of these times when maybe a human has to drive in the truck. But you got to start somewhere. It just underscores kind of where we are with autonomy and trucking, right? There's still work to be done. There's still money that needs to be invested. And now you potentially have Aurora, Tesla. The other question I have, Grayson, is like, maybe Elon is different. What do you mean maybe? Elon is definitely different. But typically in corporate America, when a competitor does something, it evokes a response. So like if you're maybe Waymo could care less about Tesla, but if Tesla starts talking about trucking, right, and and autonomy on the semi, do we potentially see Waymo starting to indicate that they're going to revive their trucking business that has been put aside?
That is one of the greatest parlor games that's currently going on in the traditional trucking industry and autonomous trucking. Charlie Chapp previously ran the program, and the clear indicator of everything in the parlor game is no. There is not even a whisper of a noise to go there. That's just what's been going on. Everybody asks the question, and everybody comes to the same conclusion. No. But you never know. You never know.
Well, let's just say that all these people are wrong, because that has happened sometimes. Do you think Waymo would have to go from a standing start, or is there some existing knowledge, whether in people or in actual tech or in actual physical equipment? I think maybe some of these locations might still exist where they're not starting from stop if they decide to go that route.
From a infrastructure standpoint, Waymo, I don't know the terms of the thing, so I'm not going to speculate. Their depot is now controlled, not owned, controlled or leased by Wabi. It's actually owned by Hillwood, so there you go. On the truck standpoint, Waymo, believe it or not, and Daimler has publicly confirmed this on multiple earnings calls, Daimler Truck, still has an OEM relationship, a development deal. So that chassis is there, in theory, ready to go. So yes, from a chassis standpoint, Alphabet getting real estate, well, it's not very hard. Hi, we're Alphabet. Oh, what can we sell you today? That's not hard. The big question is, and I'll defer this to, somebody that we know, is to Chuck Price. Can the technology transfer over? I don't know. But the ingredients are there if they decided they did want to eventually turn it back on.
Last question on this topic before we move to Google and the earnings and the Waymo. A truck, however much it weighs, traveling 50 miles an hour, because that's the fuel efficient way to do it, will the Tesla Semi have a LiDAR?
Based on everything that Elon has publicly stated, I'll say no, but then I'm going to go back to your world. You never know.
Okay, let's move on to Google, or as they call themselves, Alphabet. They reported also, other bets is where the things that we care about are, that had revenue of $380 million for the quarter, and of course a loss of $1.8 billion. So we talk about these kind of competitors, the field to the big money guys of Google and Tesla and Amazon. But even the big guys are losing a lot of money, on these other bets and expansion. And that's not only Waymo that's in there, but I'm sure they're a big chunk of those losses. And yet, if they still get a question on the call, I'm not on the Google call, but someone asked, basically asking when the Waymo spin is going to happen, and Sundar's response was basically a non-response. We're really focused on scaling the business right now and executing that to that extraordinary potential. So he said a whole lot of nothing. So I don't know if we have any more indications. Waymo, I thought, got far less profile on this call. Obviously, people were more focused on the CapEx that Google was spending on AI. So kind of Waymo got lost in the mix. So there wasn't that much to talk about in terms of the earnings call.
And I'm basing this off of going quarter over quarter. I'm the nerd that actually listens and pays close attention to things. This, and I have not run the numbers yet. In my recollection, it has been, over the last, I would say, 6 quarters, the smallest amount of Waymo commentary from Sundar. And that to me is very, very interesting because it was so minimal. No milestone. If you go back the previous quarter, Sundar has announced a milestone. Very minimal.
The only other thing I want to kind of shout out here is that, and this gets back to the Tesla call, someone actually asked them about doing rideshare again, which I thought was amazing, because it not only has Tesla been pretty explicit saying this is a go-it-alone strategy with no need for Uber or any rideshare company, it comes at a time when, it seems like Uber and Waymo are headed for divorce with all this regulatory battle stuff that we covered last week and I wrote about this week. But it was funny to hear kind of an analyst asking about this still on the Tesla earnings call.
I get confused by analysts sometimes. Before I want to go back to Alphabet, and then I'm going to go back to here. So if you look at one of the fastest growing drivers that I suspect, based on any AI developer, I don't know why one analyst did not ask Alphabet about the growth of grounded search revenue. It just seems a clear understanding of not using the product. Now to Robotaxi and Tesla, same thing. And I'm not saying this to be mean to your profession, but shouldn't there be like an unwritten rule where you have to use the product before you can ask a question about it?
I guess so. I didn't, whatever. It was frustrating, but at least they're taking questions. We have companies now that are basically not even allowing analysts to ask questions live on the conference call. Comcast, Disney, Piecyk, which is Paramount, and having them submit questions to ask. So at least, people are getting the questions, but analysts, use your time a little bit better so we don't get cut off from being able to ask Elon questions. One last thing, Grayson, and now I'm going to have you put your Inspector Clouseau on hat, because this is, again, road to autonomy. This is your AI bot, maybe not, with Omega. There was a lot of hubbub this week when we saw that, that Tesla was picking up some people at the curbside at the airport. As longtime listeners know, I've railed against the craziness of Waymo getting pushed out to the kiss and fly lot, not even getting to where the Uber guys, if anyone's been to San Francisco, pick up by that garage. But you put the Clouseau on hat, and what did you discover? Why was this happening?
We asked Omega, we said, why is this happening? And Omega's been trained in great regulatory depth. Tesla, for the airport, they got a license in the airport. They have a limousine. Yes, the limousine. Think of Pretty Woman, Richard Gere, Julia Roberts, that type of limousine. They have a limousine permit. That's how they're able to do it. And in the state of California, Tesla does not have any form of autonomous permit. They have a rideshare permit. So when you combine the rideshare permit with the limousine permit, which requires a human, that's how they're able to do it.
It just seems like crazy rules from San Francisco, but nice job for Road to the Autonomy and Omega. You guys surface a lot of information. How do I get that information on a more regular basis?
So if you're interested in indices, we launched a subscription to indices. So you can go to indices.roadtoautonomy and subscribe, and you get all of that data. And if you're interested in the true Omega pipe, we offer a variety of data services. So just send an email to hello@roadtoautonomy. Happy to get you on a subscription. There's a lot of good data used by a lot of good folks in there.
Let's shift to the other behemoth in autonomy, if not necessarily the leader, Amazon, specifically Zoox, which issued a software recall for, I think it was about 100 of its vehicles. The number doesn't matter because it couldn't get through smoke. Now, wait a minute. I thought LiDAR could see through everything. So what the hell is going on once again? Here we are again. And I think this caused a stir the last time when I was going after Waymo for when that kid got bumped. But once again, why is LiDAR not able to see through a smoke-filled emergency fire scene, Grayson? Why?
I took this and I ran with this. I tweeted at Cheech and Chong. I said, come on, we need experts. Why can't it see through? There is a lot of moving parts. And as I said to an individual on the phone last night, that I believe that the Zoox vehicle is over-engineered. And why it can't see through smoke, it just raises more questions and it gives more validation to what Elon is saying with camera.
Well, you and I think it feels like it's alone because it seems like they get a lot of rope. I've questioned kind of where Zoox is, but Amazon, they have a lot of money, so they're not known to get rid of things or shut things down. So I guess we'll just continue to have to be patient with Zoox. I don't know if it's great timing with NHTSA, if this stuff's happening and Morrison's talking about how they need to talk better, with first responders when, at the same time, Morrison is looking at getting rid of any requirements for pedals and wheels. But, hopefully they can see through the smoke, let's call it, and get to a solution that's good for autonomy in general, and also obviously safe for our citizens. That's the most important thing. That's what this is all about, right? Safety and changing our economy.
Yeah, we don't want the Zoox mobile to go up in smoke. That's at the end of the day, we don't want it to go. But you know what's really interesting last week that I picked up on a very interesting nuance, and I have a suspicion of why. CNBC, when they talked about this, is branding it Amazon's Zoox, no longer just Zoox. Is that because Zoox doesn't get traffic? I noticed that little nuance there is very interesting and very telling.
I think for them, their investors care a lot more about Amazon than some rando company called Zoox. So that's probably the main motivation. Yes, interest. So there's another company that is experiencing some management change. No, it's not GM. Sterling is still there, but he wasn't on the call, not mentioned. I don't know what's happened to Sterling Anderson at GM, but I digress. Mobileye, they've had a CEO for 27 years, Grayson, and he's now stepping down. And this comes at a time when the stock is obviously getting pressured. They've made a major pivot. In the past, they've said they want to be asset light. Now they're talking about being, fully vertically integrated. I think he has basically acknowledged that, the company is basically outgrowing his founder model and enters a phase where they need better operational execution at a scale that they need. This is not probably that different than Apple, right? Moving to a different hardware guy, as AI is kind of upon us. So, whatever. CEO stepped down. It's unclear whether he's going to be in the board or not, whether he was forced out or not really relevant. The real question, though, Grayson, is, what likelihood do you think that Mobileye can put up a vertically integrated with a not even yet OEM announced car, right? Within a reasonable time frame, just another vertically integrated player in the market. And does that also reflect perhaps maybe the frustration that Mobileye itself has in dealing with OEMs? If there was a guy to deal with OEMs, it should be Mobileye and Qualcomm and NVIDIA. Like, those are the OEM theoretical partners. Now this guy is going out and doing vertical integration. That's probably not a great sign on what the OEMs are willing to push forward.
I'm merely reading the tea leaves here. And this is pure speculation, but it seems to me that perhaps Mobileye is getting ready to be sold again. I don't necessarily see a path for it to be a standalone operator on a Robotaxi. I think it's going to complex a lot of the relationships that they have with OEMs. And those relationships are further being massively more complex with Stellantis now going with Wave, even though I know Mobileye still has a relationship with Stellantis. But a lot of these overlaps, and let's not forget a company that you've covered for decades that does a great job in telco is now moving into automotive as Qualcomm. So there's a lot of deep-pocketed competitors emerging, and the question is this a sign that the company could potentially be put up for sale?
I mean, it's gone through so many processes. The overall valuation of this thing is now shrinking. I'm not sure who necessarily the buyer is, but they're going to announce some capital markets day before the end of the year where we'll get some more details on this. Again, we don't know who the OEM is for any of this stuff. They have obvious candidates, right? They got the VW ID Buzz, which is the vehicle in the Uber LA program. But I don't know. It's just not a great situation for them, and not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure a model that investors are really going to embrace. But I mean, it feels a lot like the whole concept of BlackBerry, where it's like, okay, they wanted to sell it as a service, and then like, okay, let's just do it on our own to kind of prove it out as a model.
Researcher Motion, for that while, they had that heck of a run there. If you go way back, let's go back 15, 16 years to the early days of autonomy. Even then, the market wasn't taking Mobileye serious. And I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. I'm just saying the market even then had questions because the engineers didn't use it. And if the engineers that are building these products are not using it, there's a lot bigger questions there, and it's clearly being reflected in the performance of the stock.
And I'm seeing a quote here from the call that reminds me of something else in our space. And the quote is specifically, "This initiative is not a replacement for our existing partnership. It's an extension of them." The problem is, though, these partners don't necessarily look at it this way. They're like, you're going to be becoming a competitor to what we're doing, and then you're trying to help us. I don't know. NVIDIA theoretically could face the same thing, although NVIDIA is trying to stay kind of back and say we're only going to help everybody, give everyone the driving data, try and enable everyone. We're not necessarily going to have our own car. You think they might in the future? We'll see. Qualcomm, same thing. But I don't like, this is different. And what it reminds me of a little bit is the Volvo Autonomous Group on the trucking side of things, where what we hear in the trucking world is like, wait a minute, this guy is now going to be a competitor to what we were doing, and they still want us to buy their trucks. So I get why companies try to thread the needle because of the market opportunity. I don't know if it's underestimating what their, other customers, how their other customers will perceive it, especially when those customers have other options in the market to partner with. And in this case, as it relates to Mobileye, you've got Qualcomm and potentially NVIDIA.
If you look at the vast Volvo Autonomous Solutions, I mean, they had a rocky road to get there, but I'm going to give a lot of credit to Vast's upper management. They had the backbone and they stood with it, and there was a very good opportunity for Vast to play a large role in autonomous trucking. But don't forget, Vast is not publicly traded. There's a big difference there where Mobileye is, and Vast had the support of the developer and the engineering community. Mobileye doesn't necessarily have that, so there's different dynamics at play.
Well, in any event, it's on the radar. I got to spend more time. I will be back to our listeners with more, with more on Mobileye when I kind of get a better sense of what's going on there. What happened on the foreign autonomy desk this week, Grayson?
The foreign autonomy desk has taken us back to China. China now has once again begun to issue robotaxi permits. This time, a company just went public on the Hong Kong exchange, Momenta. They've got a permit to do driverless robotaxi commercial operations in Shenzhen. So Momenta is getting the momentum, no pun intended.
Nicely done. Anything else?
We just need to continue to watch as we're coming into the fall here. The Leafs are changing, the football's coming, the beer's coming, and then all eyes turn to London. Does Waymo launch in Q4? Does Uber launch with Wave? So that's something to watch there on the foreign autonomy desk, and something that we'll be paying close attention to.
I mean, it's been kind of quiet on the Wave front, right? So, but that is an expectation in the fourth quarter. So the other expectation in the fourth quarter is Lucid Neuro. They are reporting their quarter, next week. So that's what's up for next week. Maybe we'll get some update on how that timeline looks, because they have to report every quarter as opposed to Neuro, which is a private company. Uber's also going to report. So that should definitely, I think, be an interesting call with all this stuff swirling around about Waymo.
It's going to be very, very interesting. And I'm looking to get color and commentary from Dara on their delivery strategy. That's something to watch there, because there could be some telling signs as it relates to Uber's continued investments in delivery. Anything else we need to look for next week?
Watch Orlando, Tampa, but I think after this Tesla earnings call, I'm just going to tamper my expectations on Tesla ramp for now, because I just think that's not in the near term horizon. And again, doing more prep for our Dallas field trip that's coming up. Got a lot of good feedback from listeners. I added an extra day, so we're going to see some of our listeners in the Dallas area. So it should be a good trip to see what's going on with Aurora and other technology companies in Dallas.
Yeah, looking forward to Dallas. And you never know, maybe I'll bust out a cowboy hat, or you'll bust out a cowboy hat. You never know, but we'll be in Dallas from the Big D, doing field work, having really great conversations. The future is bright, the future autonomous, the future is scaling profitable commercial operations. Walt, until next week.